Incident report, filed by Sentinel Kestrel, Eastern Column, Thrennic Honor Guard, on the day of the 900th year renewal. Filed once, filed correctly. I have been told, since this afternoon, that those two things matter far more than I ever understood. I have fired my weapon exactly once in 400 years of service, and I did it during a peace ceremony, into the chest of a woman who represents the entire human species. That is the sentence I keep trying to write at the top of this report. I have started it 11 times. Every version sounds worse than the last, so I'm simply going to tell you what happened, in order, the way my training says an incident report should be told, and you can decide for yourself how badly I have ended 900 years of Thrennic Terran peace. I was standing at the eastern column of the ceremony hall, third position from the dais, ceremonial discharge rifle held at present arms in both hands, the way I have held it at 41 prior treaty renewals without incident. The hall was lit gold, the way it always is for these things. Warm light pouring down through the high glass ribs of the ceiling, catching on the banners that have hung there since before my grandmother's shell hardened, each one stitched with the same number. 900. 900 years since the Thrennic Empire, the oldest continuous power in this galaxy, and the human commanders of Earth agreed to stop trying to kill each other. Every 10 years we renew it in this room. Every 10 years I stand at the eastern column and hold a rifle that has never once been loaded with anything more dangerous than ceremonial confetti resin, and nothing happens, because nothing is supposed to happen. Commander Blaire stood at the center of the dais in her charcoal uniform, hands folded behind her back, spine so straight it looked mechanical. I had been briefed on her that morning. Human, 31 years standard, decorated. Precise to the point where her own delegation reportedly found her exhausting. 15 minutes before the ceremony began, she had asked our protocol officer twice what time the reception afterward was scheduled to start, because the printed itinerary said 6 and the verbal briefing had said past. She wanted it resolved, she wanted it written down correctly. I remember thinking that was an odd thing to fixate on, an hour before a 900-year renewal. Ophira, the spore bloom, our chief diplomat, stood beside her with both hands resting flat on the edge of the dais, the way she always steadies herself when a ceremony is running long. The spore clusters along her collarbone glowed their usual slow, warm teal, the color she goes when everything is proceeding exactly as planned, and her two pale violet eyes stayed fixed on the far doors. She had rehearsed this renewal with Commander Blaire twice the day before. Both of them knew the choreography. Ophira would speak the treaty renewal aloud. Blaire would respond. I would fire a ceremonial round into the air above the dais, confetti resin would bloom out across the hall, and everyone would clap and go eat. Ophira began speaking. Her voice carried the way it always does in that hall, warm and rolling, spores brightening with each clause of the treaty. 900 years, she said, unbroken. I raised the rifle to the ceiling angle, the one I have used 41 times, and I felt the stock settle into the same groove against my shoulder it always settles into. I do not know how to explain what happened next, except to say that the rifle did not fire upward. It fired directly across the hall, at chest height, and it hit Commander Blaire square in the sternum. The confetti resin round should have burst against the ceiling in a soft cloud of gold. Instead, I watched it cross 11 meters of open air and strike her with an audible sound, a flat, wet thump like a hand against a drum, and every single Thrennic official in that hall, 300 of us, went completely, instantly silent. My crest, I am told, shot straight up off the back of my skull. I did not feel it happen. I closed both eyes for exactly 1 second, and in that 1 second I understood that I had just fired a weapon into a human commander during a treaty renewal broadcast live to 2 governments, and that somewhere in the 900 years of careful diplomatic language stacked behind me, there was probably no clause that covered this. Ophira's spores went from warm teal to a grey so pale I thought they had gone out entirely. She did not move. Nobody moved. The only motion in the entire hall was the small drifting cloud of gold confetti resin, catching the light exactly the way it was supposed to, settling gently onto the shoulders of a woman everyone in that room fully expected to be dying. Blaire looked down at the center of her own chest. There was a mark there, dark and spreading slightly across the charcoal fabric, roughly the size of a fist. She touched it once with 2 fingers, the way you would touch a spot of spilled coffee on a shirt you liked. She did not stumble. She did not cry out. She looked, if anything, mildly inconvenienced, the way a person looks when a door does not open on the first pull. I had already begun composing my resignation in my head. I had gotten as far as the second sentence. "Was that," Blaire said into the total silence of the hall, "part of the ceremony?" Nobody answered her. I could not have answered her if my rank depended on it, which at that point it very much did. Ophira's mouth opened and closed twice before anything came out. "No," she finally managed. "No, that is not." Her spores flared bright teal, then dimmed, then flared again, an uneven, stuttering rhythm I had never once seen on her in 11 years of working beside her. Both her hands came off the dais edge and hovered, uselessly, in the air between them. "Are you in pain?" Blaire considered the question the way she might consider a line item on a budget. "No," she said. "There is a mark, though. It is not coming out of this fabric." I want to be clear that I understood, in that moment, that something had gone catastrophically wrong with the ceremonial rifle, and that whatever it had actually fired was very much not confetti resin, and that the woman standing 11 meters away from me was either in shock so profound it had bypassed her nervous system entirely, or she genuinely had not registered that she had just been shot. I lowered the rifle. Both of my chitin forearms, I noticed distantly, had begun to shake, a fine, constant tremor I could not stop in either hand. 300 Thrennic officials were staring at me with an expression I recognized, because I had felt my own face do something similar the instant before. The specific horror of watching an unrecoverable event happen in slow motion and being able to do nothing but watch it land. "Sentinel," Ophira said to me, very quietly, in a voice that had gone flat and careful in a way I had never heard from her. "What was loaded in that weapon?" "Confetti resin," I said. "The same round I have used for 41 renewals." "Then why," she said, "is there a mark on her chest that looks like that?" I did not have an answer. I still do not have a comfortable one, hours later writing this. What I had, in that moment, was the growing understanding that a 900-year peace treaty had potentially just been shattered in front of both governments' broadcast feeds by a piece of ceremonial equipment nobody had inspected in longer than I have been alive, and that the human commander at the center of it appeared to be waiting patiently for someone to answer her original question. "The reception," Blaire said again into the silence, glancing at the small chronometer on her wrist. "It is currently scheduled for 6. I was told this morning it might move to past. I would like that confirmed one way or the other before I need to file anything." Ophira stared at her. I stared at her. Somewhere behind me I heard one of the junior attendants make a small, strangled sound and then go absolutely still, as though stillness might make him invisible. "Commander," Ophira said, "you were just struck by a projectile fired from a military-grade honor rifle." "I am aware," Blaire said. "I would still like the reception time confirmed. It affects when I file my incident report, and I would rather file it once correctly than twice. I have served the Thrennic Empire for 400 years. I have stood honor guard through 6 border disputes, 2 assassination attempts on visiting dignitaries, and 1 incident involving a diplomatic gift that turned out to be alive and extremely displeased about it. I have never, in any of those 400 years, felt as completely out of my depth as I felt standing at that eastern column, watching a human woman with a fist-sized mark spreading across her chest ask a room full of horrified aliens for a scheduling update. Ophira turned to me. Her spores had steadied into something I did not have a name for. Not the warm teal of a ceremony going well, not the pale grey of fear, but something colder and more focused, the look of someone doing very fast arithmetic. "Sentinel," she said, "get that rifle to records, now, and find out exactly what it fired, because whatever just happened, it was not confetti resin, and I need to know what it was before I walk out there and tell 300 officials and 2 governments that 900 years of peace is fine. I have never moved faster in my life, and I have also never wanted less to arrive at where I was going." Because somewhere in the 400 years of accumulated Thrennic bureaucracy sitting in the records office 2 floors below us, there was an answer to what I had just fired into a human commander's chest, and I had a very bad feeling that whatever it was going to be so much worse than a war. Records lives 2 floors beneath the ceremony hall, in a wing with no windows, and lighting that has never once, in my experience, worked at full strength. I went there directly, rifle held out in front of me in both hands like it might go off again on its own, and found Bracknell the Mosswell exactly where he always is, buried behind 3 towers of data slates with a 4th threatening to slide off the desk entirely. Bracknell does not startle easily. He has spent the better part of 2 centuries cataloguing equipment nobody else wants to think about, and in my experience, nothing surprises a records officer faster than being asked a question someone actually needs answered quickly. So when I set the rifle down on his desk and said, without preamble, "I need to know what this fired, and I need to know now," the pale lichen ridges along his jaw did not so much as twitch. "Confetti resin," he said, not looking up from the slate in front of him. "It is a Hall rifle. That is all it is rated for." "It hit a human commander in the chest hard enough to leave a mark," I said. "It is not confetti resin." That got him to look up. His 2 small, sunken black eyes found mine, found the rifle, found, I assume, whatever was still showing on my crest, because he set the slate down slowly and reached for the weapon with both hands, turning it over, checking the serial etched into the stock. "This is a Hall rifle," he said again, more slowly this time, the way a person repeats something when they are trying to convince themselves it is still true. "3rd position, eastern column. I logged this exact unit into inventory myself." He pulled up something on his own slate, scrolling with one thumb, while his other hand kept turning the rifle over, checking the barrel, the chamber, the small maintenance panel along the stock that I did not know existed until he popped it open with a fingernail. Serial matches, model matches. Everything about this weapon says it should have put a soft gold cloud over the dais and nothing else. "Then explain the mark on her chest," I said. He did not answer right away. He was staring into the open maintenance panel, and something in the set of his shoulders had changed, gone rigid in a way I recognized, because I had felt my own shoulders do the same thing 11 meters from Blaire less than an hour ago. "When was this rifle last serviced?" I asked. Bracknell pulled up another record, and this time the lichen along his jaw did move, contracting tight against the bone, a reaction I have seen from him perhaps 3 times in a century. 211 years ago, he said. I felt something cold settle into my stomach that had nothing to do with the 300 officials currently waiting upstairs for an explanation. 211 years, I repeated. The Hall rifles were pulled from active rotation before that, Bracknell said, still scrolling, voice going flatter with every line he read. They were reclassified as ceremonial only after the last modernization pass. Nobody reservices ceremonial-only equipment. There was never a reason to. He looked up at me. Kestrel, when this rifle was pulled from active rotation, what do you think it was pulled from? I did not answer because I did not want to be right and because some part of me already knew. These were never built as confetti launchers, he said. They were retrofitted. Someone, 211 years ago, took a working piece of Thrennic hardware and fitted it with a resin cartridge housing, and every honor guard since has been trained to load the cartridge and never once asked what was underneath it, because why would they? It is a ceremony rifle. It shoots confetti. Both his hands had gone very still on the maintenance panel. The housing on this unit has a hairline crack along the seam. I do not know how old the crack is. I do not know if today's cartridge sat properly inside it or not. What I do know is that this weapon was never actually disarmed. It was covered. I stood there in the flickering light of the records office with 400 years of service behind me and understood, all at once, that I had spent my entire career resting a live mechanism against my shoulder 41 times and calling it a formality. I need to know what is underneath the housing, I said. Exactly, not what it was rated for 2 centuries ago, what it can do right now, today, to a human sternum. Bracknell did not move for a long moment. Then he set the rifle down on the desk, very carefully, the way you set down something you have just realized might still be capable of surprising you, and pulled up a schematic on the largest of his slates. He read it. I watched his face while he read it, watched both sunken black eyes track down the page, watched his mouth open slightly and then close again without a sound coming out. "Bracknell, I need Ophira," he said. His voice had gone strange. Not panicked, which I might have expected, but very quiet and very careful, like a person handling something breakable. "I am not saying it to you first. Get her down here, or get me up there. I am not saying it twice either, so it is going to have to be both of you at once. I have known Bracknell for the better part of a century. I have watched him deliver bad inventory news to furious quartermasters without so much as a flicker. Whatever was on that schematic had rattled him in a way I had never once seen, and he would not say another word about it, no matter how I pushed, which told me more than the schematic itself would have. I left him there with the rifle and went looking for Ophira, and that was when I ran directly into Renna, the wind scale in the long, reflective hallway between records and the hall, 3 press drones trailing behind her at shoulder height, already recording. "Sentinel Kestrel," she said, falling into step beside me before I could turn away, her scales already shimmering that particular shade of gold she gets when she knows she is sitting on something. She kept pace with a slate in one hand and the other raised, 2 fingers steering the drones without once looking back at them, both her narrow amber eyes fixed on the side of my face. "Word is, a Thrennic honor rifle discharged directly into the human commander during the renewal. Word is, she is still standing. Word is, nobody upstairs will confirm or deny either half of that sentence." "I have no comment," I said, which was true, and also the single most Thrennic bureaucratic sentence I have ever spoken in my life, and I hated myself slightly for it. "You are covered in confetti resin residue, and your crest has not come down in 40 minutes, Renna said. "That is not a no comment. That is a yes. Ask me a better question." I kept walking. She kept pace, drones bobbing along behind her, and I made the mistake of glancing sideways at her instead of straight ahead, which she apparently read as an opening, because her next question came fast and low. "Is the treaty still standing?" "The treaty is fine," I said too quickly, and heard how it sounded the moment it left me. "That is the first thing you have said today that sounded rehearsed," Renna said, and I did not have an answer for that either, because it had been rehearsed. It is the line every honor guard is trained to say the instant a civilian asks about treaty stability, drilled into us before we ever touch a ceremonial weapon, and I had said it on reflex with a cracked, undisclosed weapon housing sitting on a desk 2 floors below us. I told her I needed to go, and I meant it, and for once she let me, though I did not miss the way her crest had gone very still and very focused as I walked away. The exact look of someone who has decided a story is real and has simply chosen not to say so yet. I found Blaire before I found Ophira. She was seated in a small side room off the hall, uniform jacket removed and folded over the back of her chair, the mark on her undershirt now a deep purple-black bruise, spreading wider than it had been an hour ago. A Thrennic medical attendant hovered nearby, clearly unsure what to do with a species she had had exactly 1 afternoon of briefing on. Blaire herself sat with a slate on her knee, writing. "Commander," I said, "you should be resting." "I am resting," she said without looking up. "I am filing the incident report while the details are accurate. If I wait, people start telling me what they think happened instead of what did, and then I have to file a correction, and a correction on a document like this looks worse than the incident itself." She glanced up at me then, and her eyes went to the rifle-shaped absence at my side, to my empty hands. "Did you find out what it fired?" "Not yet," I said. "Records is working on it." "Get me the answer before 6, she said, returning to her slate. "If the reception is still on, I would like to walk in there having already filed something accurate, rather than something I have to explain twice." I left her writing, calm and precise, a bruise the size of a fist spreading slowly under her collarbone, and went to find Ophira with the growing, sick certainty that whatever Bracknell had found in that schematic, it was going to make the words "reception at 6" feel very small indeed. I found Ophira in the small antechamber behind the dais, still in her ceremonial coat, spore clusters cycling through that same cold, focused pattern I had seen when she sent me to records. She did not ask how it had gone. She took one look at my face and said, "Records. Now." And we went. Bracknell had not moved. The rifle sat on his desk exactly where I had left it, and the schematic was still open on his largest slate, glowing in the flickering light like something he did not want to look at directly. He waited until both of us were standing in front of him before he spoke, and when he did, his voice had the careful, over-enunciated quality of someone who has rehearsed a sentence in his head so many times it no longer sounds like language. "It is not a weapon," he said. Ophira's spores stuttered. "Bracknell, it put a bruise the size of a fist on a human sternum." "I know what it did," he said. "I am telling you what it is. It was never ordnance. The retrofit 211 years ago was not somebody disarming a weapon and covering it with a confetti housing." He turned the largest slate toward us with both hands, and I made myself look at the schematic again, this time reading past the parts that had already frightened me the first time. "It is a seal press, old-world Thrennic diplomatic hardware. Before we had digital treaty ratification, physical treaties were closed with a pressure-fired wax seal, fired hard enough to punch the emblem through 3 layers of ceremonial parchment at once. That is what is under the housing. That is the mechanism. It was not built to hurt anyone. It was built to stamp a symbol into paper from across a room, because some ceremony designer 800 years ago thought that looked more dramatic than a hand seal." I stared at him. "You are telling me I shot her with a stamp?" "I am telling you the housing cracked," Bracknell said, "and the confetti cartridge sat crooked in a mechanism that still has, apparently, enough force behind it to drive a wax seal through parchment at 11 meters. It fired the confetti resin the way it was supposed to. It also fired whatever was left of the old pressure charge behind it, because the crack let both systems trigger at once. She was not shot, she was sealed." He hesitated, and for the first time since I had met him, looked genuinely embarrassed on behalf of his entire department. "There is an emblem stamped under that bruise, the Thrennic Treaty crest, pressed straight into her skin." The room went very quiet. Ophira's spores had gone still. The eerie stillness that I now understood, having watched her long enough, was worse than any flare of color. "Say that again," she said, slowly. "The rifle did not attack the human commander," Bracknell said. "It ratified her. 211 years of dust and a cracked housing turned a decorative confetti gun back into functioning 800-year-old diplomatic hardware, and it did exactly what it was designed to do to a treaty document. It just happened to do it to a person instead of a parchment, because nobody in 2 centuries of ceremonial planning ever imagined that would be possible." I sat down. I do not remember choosing to sit down. I simply found myself in a chair Bracknell keeps for nobody in particular, staring at a schematic of a mechanism that was apparently older than the piece it had almost ended. Ophira recovered first, which did not surprise me. She has recovered first from every crisis I have watched her walk through, and I have come to understand it is not that things frighten her less, only that she does the frightened part faster than the rest of us and gets to the useful part sooner. "Does the seal mean anything?" she said. "Legally, ceremonially. Is there a version of Thrennic treaty law where an accidental physical stamping counts as something binding?" Bracknell blinked at her. "I catalogue supply requisitions, Ophira. I do not know treaty law." "Find out," she said. "Fast, because right now I have 300 officials waiting for an explanation, a press correspondent I already caught fishing in the hallway, and a human commander who is going to walk back out there in 9 minutes, and I need to know whether what happened to her chest is a horrifying accident we apologize for, or the single most literal treaty renewal in the history of either government. I want to be honest about the state of my own thinking in that moment, because this report is meant to be accurate and not flattering. Some very small, very tired part of me had started to find this funny. Not the bruise. The bruise was real, and it hurt to think about, and Blaire had earned better than an antique stamping press going off in a hall full of dignitaries. But the rest of it, the 211 years of nobody checking a housing seam, the fact that our most sacred ceremonial ritual had been quietly loaded this entire time with the diplomatic equivalent of a rubber stamp with delusions of grandeur, some part of me wanted to laugh and knew better than to let it show on my crest in front of Ophira. Rena found us before Bracknell found his answer. She did not knock. She came through the record's doorway with her drones trailing and her scales lit up gold enough to read by, and I understood, watching her face, that whatever careful containment Ophira had been trying to build around this had already failed somewhere upstairs. "It is on every feed," Rena said. "Both governments. Someone from the hall staff leaked footage of the discharge before anyone thought to pull it. The human networks are calling it an assassination attempt. Ours are split. Half think it is an act of war, half think we are covering something up, and every single one of them is asking the same two questions, which is more than I can say for you people." She looked at Ophira. "Is the treaty broken, and is the commander alive?" "She is alive," Ophira said. "The treaty is." She stopped, looked at Bracknell, looked at the schematic still glowing on his slate. "The treaty," Bracknell said slowly into the silence, "might currently be more renewed than it has ever been in 900 years, but I need an hour and a treaty archivist to confirm that, and I do not have an hour because—" He checked the timestamp on his own slate. 6 minutes to the scheduled reception. The human networks have started a countdown clock. If Commander Blaire does not appear on schedule, they are treating that as confirmation she is dead. Rena's crest went rigid. "There is a countdown clock. There is a countdown clock," Bracknell confirmed, with the flat despair of a man who spends his professional life surrounded by paperwork and has just watched paperwork become the single most dangerous object in the building. I looked at Ophira. Ophira looked back at me, and in that look was every treaty renewal I had ever stood honor guard for. Every calm and rehearsed line I had been trained to deliver, none of which had prepared either of us for the specific problem of an antique wax seal mechanism, accidentally ratifying 900 years of peace into the sternum of a human commander, who was, at this exact moment, 6 minutes from a scheduled reception, and reportedly still filling out paperwork about it. "Get her," Ophira said to me. "Get Blaire, get her back to the dais, and get her there before that clock hits 0. Because I would rather explain a very strange accident to a living woman standing in front of 300 officials than explain a countdown clock's silence to 2 governments who already think we shot her on purpose." I was moving before she finished the sentence. Rena fell in step beside me again, drones and all, and this time I did not tell her I had no comment, because there was no version of the next 6 minutes in which no comment was going to be either true or useful. "You are going to want a camera on this," I told her, which was the closest I have ever come in 400 years to inviting a journalist somewhere on purpose. "I already have 3, Rena said, and for the first time since I had met her, she was not smiling like someone chasing a story. She looked, if anything, like someone who had just realized the story was bigger than the version she had been chasing, and had no idea yet how it ended. Neither, if I am honest, did I. I ran the length of that reflective hallway with a 211-year-old maintenance failure sitting behind me in records and a scheduled reception ticking down in front of me, toward a woman who had, as far as I could tell, spent the worst hour of her professional life more concerned with the accuracy of her paperwork than with the fact that she might currently be wearing the most literal peace treaty ever signed, stamped directly into her skin. She was already standing when I reached the side room, jacket back on, slate tucked under one arm, both hands busy straightening a collar that did not need straightening. 4 minutes, Blaire said before I could speak. "The reception. Has it been confirmed?" "Commander," I said, "I need to tell you what the rifle actually fired, and I need to do it while we walk." "Then walk," she said, and went past me into the hallway at a pace I had to work to match. I told her. All of it, in the time it took us to cross a corridor built for slow processions and never once for running. The retrofit, the crack in the housing, the 800-year-old pressure mechanism sitting underneath a confetti cartridge that nobody had looked beneath in 211 years. The seal press, the crest. The fact that the mark spreading across her chest was not an injury so much as a signature. Blaire stopped walking. Both her hands went still at her sides. She looked down at her own uniform for perhaps 2 seconds, and I watched a human being process, in real time, the information that she had been stamped like an envelope in front of 2 planetary broadcast feeds. "So, it is a government mark," she said. "That is not the part I expected you to take from this." "It changes which form I use," she said, and started walking again. "An injury from ceremonial equipment is a Form 9. An impression of a foreign government's official seal on the person of an accredited commander is a Form 4. Those get filed to completely different offices." She was already thumbing at her slate as she walked, correcting something. "I filed a 9. I am going to have to file a 4 as well." Renner, keeping pace on my other side with all 3 drones now flying in a tight arc above us, said, "You have been shot with the concept of a stapler, and your concern is the filing category." "My concern," Blaire said, "is that whatever happens in that hall in the next 3 minutes, there is going to be an accurate written record of it, made by someone who was actually present, before anyone with a broadcast license decides what it was." The ceremony hall doors opened, and 300 Thrennic officials turned as one to look at a human woman walking back into the room where she had been shot 91 minutes earlier, upright, unbothered, holding a slate. The sound that came out of that hall is not one I can describe usefully in a report. It was not applause. It was 300 people exhaling at the same time. Ophira was already on the dais. Her spores had gone a color I had never seen on her, a hard, bright white, and both her hands were flat on the podium, and every press drone in the building was aimed at her face. She looked at Blaire. Blaire nodded once, and that single nod was, I think, the only permission Ophira needed. 900 years ago, Ophira said, our 2 peoples agreed to stop killing each other. 91 minutes ago, an honor guard of the Thrennic Empire discharged a ceremonial rifle into the chest of Commander Blaire of Earth, live, in this room, in front of all of you. I am now going to explain what actually happened, and I am asking both governments to understand that the truth is more embarrassing than the accusation. I have stood at the eastern column of that hall for 400 years. I have never once heard it go as quiet as it went then. She told them. The retrofit, the crack, the seal press, the 800-year-old mechanism our empire had been solemnly presenting arms with at every renewal for 11 generations, without a single person ever opening the maintenance panel. She said the word stamp out loud in front of 2 governments, and I watched 300 officials of the oldest power in the galaxy process the fact that our most sacred ritual had been performed for 2 centuries with a piece of antique office equipment nobody had bothered to read the label on. Somewhere in the back of the hall, one of the human delegation laughed. He tried to stop. He did not entirely manage it. Then Bracknell came through the side doors at a run, which I had also never seen, holding a slate above his head in both hands, with a very old Thrennic archivist trailing behind him at a pace that suggested she had not agreed to any of this. "Stop," Bracknell said. "Ophira, stop. Do not apologize yet." Ophira turned. "Bracknell, we are live." "I know we are live." He got to the dais, out of breath, lichen ridges pulled tight. Old compact procedure. The seal press was never the ratifying act. The seal was only ever half of it. Under the old compact, an impression is binding only if the sealed party acknowledges the impression in a filed written record within 1 rotation of it being made. That is why we stopped using them. Nobody ever filed. For 800 years, not one Thrennic official ever filled out the acknowledgement because the ceremony was the fun part and the paperwork was not, and an unacknowledged seal is legally nothing at all. It is decoration. The silence in that hall changed quality. I watched Ophira's spores shift slowly from hard white towards something else entirely. 1 rotation, she repeated. 1 rotation, Bracknell said, which is why I ran. Every head in that room turned together toward the human woman standing at the center of the dais with a slate under her arm. Blaire looked back at 300 aliens, 2 governments, and 11 press drones, and said, in exactly the tone she had used to ask about the reception time, "I filed at 41 minutes. Nobody moved. I documented the mark," she went on, holding up the slate, including dimensions, coloration, the raised impression at the center, and my identification of the impression as the Thrennic Treaty crest. I filed it under my own signature, time-stamped to both my delegation and your protocol office because I did not want anyone else describing my own chest to me later. It is an accurate record, made by the sealed party, acknowledging the impression. She paused. Within one rotation. I want to record, for the benefit of whoever reads this file, that the noise the ceremony hall made at that moment was loud enough that 2 of Renner's drones lost stabilization and had to land. The treaty had not been broken. The treaty had been ratified under old compact procedure, the oldest and most binding form our people have ever had, for the first time in 800 years, by an accident, a crack in a housing, and one human who reads footnotes. Ophira put both hands over her face. Her spores flared teal, gold, teal again. When she took her hands down, she was unmistakably laughing, and she did not particularly try to hide it, and the hall took that as permission and went completely to pieces. Renner filed her story in 90 seconds. I know because I watched her do it, standing on a chair, one hand on a slate and the other still steering drones, both amber eyes bright with the particular joy of a correspondent who arrived chasing an assassination and left with a stapler. The human networks took the countdown clock down 11 minutes later. Our networks spent the rest of the evening arguing about whether the Empire should be proud or humiliated, and settled, as far as I can tell, on both. An hour into the reception, a senior protocol official proposed, seriously, that the seal press be reinstated as permanent renewal procedure. I would like it noted, Blaire said without looking up from her plate, that I do not consent to being stamped every 10 years. Noted, Ophira said. Filed, Blaire said. I have been reassigned. Effective tomorrow, I report to Ceremonial Equipment Inspection, a department that did not exist this morning and now consists entirely of me, Bracknell, and 406 unopened maintenance panels. I am told this is not a punishment. I am told this by people who cannot look directly at me while saying it. That is the complete account. 900 years of peace, ended and re-signed inside the same second, by a mechanism older than the treaty, in a room where nobody had checked anything in 211 years. The Empire survived it. The treaty survived it. My career survived it, in a form. One correction, appended for accuracy. The reception did not begin at 6. It was moved to past, as Commander Blaire had been warned that morning by a protocol officer who was not certain and had never been confirmed by anyone because I was busy. She filed the correction herself. She filed it twice. She has not forgiven me for either. End.